So, after studying this module, you should be able to understand the skill of active listening, know about the barriers to listening, learn the skills of active listening, analyze the indicators of accurate listening, and have an insight into the meaning of cultural skills. In the previous module, we discussed the self-care and attending skills of a counselor. In this module, we continue to discuss the behavioral skills. A very significant behavioral skill is the listening skill of the counselor. Listening is a significant aspect of any communication. A meaningful and satisfactory conversation can take place only when both the client and the counselor are listening to each other. In a therapeutic setting, the behavior of the counselor and his listening abilities become extremely important. The counselor needs to focus his attention fully on the client. Listening is facilitated by the counselor's self-awareness and learning about personal internal processes and reactions in all types of situations and circumstances. There are some features of a counselor prepared to listen and have meaningful therapeutic exchange. These are: number 1, leaving one's own personal concerns and worries away from the session. Number 2, being fully aware, awake, alert and focused. Number 3, not getting distracted to external environmental occurrences and internal changes. Number 4, being self-aware to be open to clients' communications. Number 5, having a conducive environment for therapy. Number 6, having knowledge of cultural and gender differences. And number 7, being aware of and attempting to remove all personal roadblocks to communication. Now, listening or active listening implies understanding the client's complete story. To initiate this, the client has to be allowed to speak uninterruptedly. The client should follow his stream of thought even when he takes a break or pauses in between. The counselor needs to first wait and let the client finish his thoughts, and then only the counselor takes the turn to speak. Active listening involves considering all related affect, thoughts and behaviors. The counselor also needs to be aware of the barriers to listening. Now, let us understand what are barriers to listening. The counselor needs to explore a variety of roadblocks, distortions that interfere with effective hearing. Brems 2002 identifies these as: number 1, as inadequate listening. It occurs when a clinician is not attentive or is preoccupied with his personal worries and need states. In such situations, the client will not feel heard and the clinician may lose on some important issues stated by the client. Another barrier is evaluative listening. The clinician makes judgment about what the client says and thus loses objectivity. The client may thus feel misjudged and misunderstood. The clinician begins to feel superior and gives advice. Filtered or selective listening is another roadblock. In this case, the clinician hears what he expects or wants to hear according to his prejudices, stereotypes and biases. The client feels misrepresented. Also, the clinician fails to hear the client's true message and his state of being. Another barrier to listening is fact-centered listening. In this, the client only listens to overt content, that is the verbal information, and fails to see the latent or the covert content, that is the emotional and the personal message. In such cases, the client feels distant from the clinician, non-empathic and intrusive. The clinician also overuses questions and shotguns the client. Another barrier is rehearsing while listening. In this, the clinician is preoccupied with how to respond to the client, formulating responses while the client is speaking and thus not attending fully. The client feels misunderstood and disrespected and perceives the clinician as anxious. Also, the clinician misses the essential aspects of conversation and makes comments that are well phrased but off target. Another roadblock is sympathetic listening. The clinician is caught up in the client's story, that is, the content or the emotion, and over identifies with the client. The clinician may feel heard but not helped. The clinician loses objectivity and distance, leading to ineffectiveness and burnout. Now, let us come to the skills of a good listener. There are certain other skills and training required for an effective clinician. The most important of this is the clinician's ability to focus on the client and his own immediate reactions to the client. This can be achieved through training and practice. Another skill for a good listener is to hear and process the overt and the covert content, that is, the meta communication expressed non-verbally and symbolic meaning of the verbal expression. Focusing attention to the client develops with greater practice and ease in therapeutic communication. If a client is novice in his career, he may experience anxiety about the therapeutic exchange and may experience inattention and self-focus. When a therapist becomes experienced, focusing attention to the client comes naturally to him. The clinician may practice this kind of focused attention through role play in any setting. Attention can be focused by allowing others to speak without interruption, observing their non-verbal expressions when they talk, and practicing patience in responding to the client. The communication partner is significant here, and every aspect of his behavior needs to be keenly observed. Clinician can practice focused attention by listening to their own feelings and thoughts whenever they encounter a novel or challenging exchange. The clinician should also set time aside for himself each day to listen to his own thoughts and feelings. Such focused self-inspection teaches focused attention and increases self-awareness. The second important aspect of good listening is processing and understanding overt and latent communication. The counselor needs to be able to understand non-verbal communication correctly and read between the verbal lines of the client, learning to recognize incongruence and patterns of metaphor and symbolism. Focused attention involves recognition of subtle incongruence and contradictions expressed by the client. Incongruence can be between content and expression and between two non-verbal expressions. There could also be inconsistencies between speech and kinesics. There are different kinds of incongruence, such as between affect and thought, affect and behavior, thought and behavior, or among all the three. Clients also express patterns and themes in their speech. Patterns in speech are repetitive affects or behaviors that tend to show up often in times of stress and challenge. Themes are sets of ideas, beliefs, or notions that clients hold about self, others, and life. A final component of active listening is sensitivity to metaphor and symbolism. To fully understand a client's verbalizations, it is important to know the client's way of using language. Metaphors and symbols function as unique ways of communication and are generally used unconsciously. These are interpreted in the larger context. Another aspect of active listening is understanding the internal frame of reference of the client. This skill chooses to acknowledge the separatedness of me and you by getting inside the frame of reference of the other, rather than remaining in one's own internal frame of reference. Some examples of internal frame of reference responses are: example, there were other ways you could have responded to your father, or you should have been in control, or you are a very angry person. Good examples of internal frame of reference responses are: you have mixed feelings towards your father, or you are scared about your social performance, or you are frightened at the news that you have cancer. Hence, active listening involves coming to understand clients through focused attention and concentration with the aim of making them and their communication most important component of human communication. Some factors that can help one develop accurate active listening are: number 1, making the client as the focus of center of attention in therapeutic exchange. Number 2, being aware of personal reactions and their implications for or the impact on communication between the clinician and the client. Number 3, listening not only to what is being said, but also to how is it said, and observe the content and paralinguistics. Number 4, paying focused attention to non-verbal communication such as kinesics, paralinguistics, use of space, timings and physical appearance. Number 5, recognize the relationship between the client's verbal and non-verbal expressions. Number 6, allow space for silence, pause and other break in verbal exchanges. Number 7, allowing clients to finish their sentences and thoughts. Number 8, listening to the whole story, paying focused attention to content, affect, behavior, thoughts, context, meaning and emphasis. Number 9, avoiding roadblocks to communication. Number 10, learning to read between the lines and the use of metaphors and symbolism. Number 11, listening to the themes and patterns in clients' both verbal and non-verbal communication. Number 12, developing awareness of incongruence in the client's expressions, recognizing the incongruence between verbal and non-verbal communications, or one modality of non-verbal communication and another modality of non-verbal expression, or thoughts and feelings, or thoughts and actions, or feelings and actions, or feelings, thoughts and actions. Now let us understand what are the indicators of active listening. There are certain factors that indicate the presence of active listening by the therapist. Number 1 is positive reinforcement. An effective dyadic interaction between the client and the therapist is incomplete without appropriate positive reinforcement by the therapist. The occasional use of phrases like yes, go on, ah, I see, very good, or indeed during conversation will give signals to the client that the clinician is interested and is keenly listening to what the client is disclosing. However, the clinician should be careful while using these, as it may distract the client or may give client wrong message on putting emphasis on insignificant parts of the message. In such cases, when there is a tendency for wrong interpretation, the counselor should elaborate on the reasons for his agreement to the client. Second indicator is remembering. Another way to indicate that successful and active listening is going on is remembering what the client said in the present session as well as in previous sessions. The clinician should remember significant points in the client's disclosures. This helps clients feel well perceived and understood by the clinician. The issues and details discussed in the previous sessions make the client trust the clinician, develop good rapport and encourages him to share more details with the clinician. To be successful at remembering, the clinician may take brief notes of significant points discussed. This is also helpful in later questioning and clarifications. Third indicator is questioning. The clinician should also put forth relevant questions to bring out more details and indicate to the client that he has been keenly attending to what has been said. It also shows that the interest of the clinician in knowing more about the client. Fourth indicator is reflection. Reflection is a specialized cognitive technique, hence it is only briefly mentioned here. Reflection or mirroring refers to repeating or rephrasing the details mentioned by the client. It is helpful in demonstrating an understanding by the client. In addition to it, it also reinforces the messages shared by the client. Fifth is clarification. Another way of showing that active listening is taking place is the use of open questions, such as it gives a signal to the speaker to elaborate on some points. Sixth indicator is summarization. It involves repetition by the client of the messages conveyed by the speaker in his own words to indicate that the message has been accurately received and correctly understood. Now let us understand what is the importance of active listening. Active listening by counselors have a number of important consequences. That is, number 1, establishing rapport. A good rapport is developed if the clients feel they are being listened to and understood by the counselor. One study done by Elliott in 1985 of helpful and non-helpful events in brief counseling identified 8 kinds of events perceived as helpful by clients. These helpful events were grouped into 2 superclusters corresponding to interpersonal and task aspects of counseling. Understanding was predominant cluster in interpersonal grouping. Second is establishing trust. The counselor needs to establish his or her credentials of honesty, integrity and reliability to help the client develop trust in him or her. Trust is an interactive process in counseling. Counselors can help establish trust and dissolve mistrust and fear of rejection by listening carefully to the clients. Next comes bridging differences. When the counselor is actively listening, he or she can bridge the gap between him and the client and not make the client feel as if he belongs to a different group, such as old, dying, female, physically disabled, black, immigrant, Muslim, etc. Another is helping clients to disclose. Clients may be shy and sensitive and perceive disclosure as risky. Hence, good listening can help the client feel accepted, safe and understood, which in turn helps them to choose to tell their stories and share their inner worlds. Next comes helping clients to experience feeling. Many clients have been inadequately listened to in the past, hence may have decreased their capacity for emotional responsiveness. Active listening can help them tune into and acknowledge the inner flow of their emotions. They can become more strong and centered. Next comes creating an influence base. The counselor is a developmental educator actively influencing clients to develop self-helping skills. Active listening can help develop the influence base so that clients are more likely to listen to them. Also, showing understanding to the clients from different cultural groups contributes to perceptions of counselors as having status and credibility. Now let us understand another important skill which is called as the cultural skill. This is also incorporated as part of the behavioral skills. Cultural skills have been discussed herein as they represent certain behaviors of the clinician specially adapted to the culture of the client. A clinician needs to either acquire and learn new skills specific to the culture, sensitivity or needs to make certain changes in his existing repertoire of skills. Some cultures have put greater emphasis on non-verbal communication. In some cultures, silence may mean respect and not resistance. Clinicians need to avoid and eliminate inappropriate phrases, terms and expressions from their vocabularies. They need to recognize that stereotyping and prejudiced behaviors are destructive for therapy. Hence, the behaviors, values and attitudes have to be understood within a larger context and not in an ethnocentric perspective. Such clinicians become ethno-relativistic in their approach. They have the skills not to categorize people according to their ethnic or cultural background and not to treat members of any ethnic groups as identical. Hence, culturally competent clinicians need to become the agents of social change. They disregard any form of discrimination based on ethnicity, sexual preference, age, mental or physical disability, religion, gender, etc. Through such values, they help everyone to access mental health resources and services. This will also ensure creating a social change and develop a society that is respectful and humane to all its members. Now, let us summarize what all we have learnt in this module. A very important behavioral skill is the listening skill of the counselor. Listening is a significant aspect of any communication. A meaningful and satisfactory communication can be achieved only when the client and the counselor are listening to each other. In a therapeutic setting, the behavior of the counselor and his listening abilities become extremely important. The counselor needs to focus his attention fully on the client. Listening is facilitated by the counselor's self-awareness, learning about personal internal processes and reactions in all types of situations. In addition, the counselor needs to explore a variety of roadblocks, distortions or distractions that may interfere with effective hearing. Brem's 2002 identifies these as inadequate listening, evaluative listening, filtered or selective listening, fact-centered listening, rehearsing while listening and sympathetic listening. Some factors that indicate active listening by the therapist are positive reinforcement, remembering, questioning, reflection, clarification and summarization. Another significant skill for effective therapy is the cultural skill. Herein, the behaviors, values and attitudes need to be understood within a larger context and not in an ethnocentric perspective. Such clinicians become ethno-relativistic in their approach. They have the skills not to categorize people according to their ethnic or cultural backgrounds and not treat members of any ethnic group as identical. Hence, culturally component clinicians need to become the agents of social change. They disregard any form of communication based on ethnicity, sexual preferences, age, mental or physical disability, religion, gender, etc.